actually for us. Really now, I'm just going to open the floor, kind of a discussion. So, who wants to kick off?
Not kick off.
There we go.
Thank you very much. There's three questions really. One is, given the ubiquitous nature of yawning, its frequency is very high amongst all of us, amongst other animals, there must be some evolutionary reason why it's so important. It seems quite important. The other thing is that there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that people on SSRIs seem to, one of the side effects is excessive yawning. And I wonder whether there's any sort of link to serotonin. And the other thing is in terms of aging, do people yawn less as they get older, do they yawn more? So is there some sort of link there? So that's my three questions.
I think those are three excellent questions. Excellent because they're extremely difficult to answer. Thank you for that. In terms of serotonin, serotonin seems to be implicated in many mood disorders, and obviously serotonin is involved to elevate your mood mainly. So an increase in serotonin tends to uplift your mood in most circumstances. I have no explanation for any of those questions. I think that's why I think they're really good questions, but they do give rise to a big debate on this. Is it that that particular neurotransmitter is more important than others, and obviously does it kick in social situations? We find people yawn because of, or could contagiously yawn in social situations, possibly because of being more empathetic towards other people. And is that because their serotonin levels are risen in those situations? So is there a link? There could be, yeah. I think that's quite sensible. Evolutionary, well, it seems that certainly it's across all species, almost all species. So it clearly is important. We find so many bits of behaviour in studying animals that we can't explain, or we begin to explain and think, oh, it's there and it's for that reason, and then we see something to contradict it. So we're still at an early level of understanding even that we just get to understand something in terms of our own situation, and then it doesn't fit with the animal kingdom, or vice versa. We always looked for animal models, mainly because they're victims in a way, aren't they, and they're easier to experiment on. But they can tell us lots of things, especially in group situations. But this particular group situation, what is going on, if it's a different neurochemical pathway, which it is in most animals compared to humans anyway, and certainly socially, well, of course it's different. So is it evolutionary? It might, if it's evolutionary, is it to do with the brain cooling idea? And that would fit across the species. Is it to do with getting more oxygen to make you more wakeful? Could be. What we don't know is what's the level of cortisol in different species. I have no idea. I've only studied it in humans, and whether there's a link there. But we're starting off, with this line of thought. And what was your third one?
Eating. Does it change over the lifespan?
Yeah, no, that's curious, isn't it? Sorry, many neurotransmitters change in terms of their regulatory behaviour and their levels over the course of time. We all change in the way that our cells reproduce, and tend to degenerate, as I am at the moment. It's alright, I've really gone down the wrong way. As a course of ageing. So do things like sorry, I'm going to do this. Go on.
That time of year.
Don't worry, I'll drink with you.
Should have had something stronger. Is it purely an ageing mechanism? If it's a social thing, is it to do with the social situations we find ourselves in as we get older? Because that can change. I would think that's probably less likely. Because again, it's like saying, as you get older, you perhaps don't get involved in certain things, and we've proved that wrong in so many different areas, like having the silver surfers. Older people can't get involved in new technology. Well, clearly they can, and it's just giving them an access into that. So I think that is rubbish. but I would say, it would give rise to the neurochemical hypotheses that there's such a fluctuation and usually a depletion. There's atrophy in certain parts of your body, including the brain, and obviously things like substantia nigra is implicated in production of dopamine, really important for Parkinson's disease. We know that atrophies over time, as most things do. So that depletes important neurotransmitter for Parkinson's disease. When that's irregulated, it can give rise to that. So that's just one example. Serotonin clearly does change as well, and yet we don't tend naturally to have more black moods as we get older. Although there is, a case for some people get more depressed as they get older. Is it because they're going to die? Not to do with. Sorry about that. Is it to do with rather than the neurochemical levels? We don't know. But yeah, no, great, really good. I'll remember those. Very good, very good questions. And sadly, we don't know the answers to them. I don't know anybody who does either. I don't think I'm the only one. But the SSRI idea as well, to do with that, yes, I think that's interesting.
Okay.
Hi. Do people yawn more when they're tired? And has there ever been some measure of quantifying tiredness so that studies can be done in that?
There have been lots of studies looking at stress, fatigue, vigilance, concentration, and that sort of thing. And it varies individually. It really does vary. Generally, the more tired people are, the less alert people are going to be. There's lots of vigilance studies like air traffic control and things like this, that if you're staying still for a long period of time and you haven't had enough sleep, you're concentrating on single tasks that are monotonous, you're going to get tired. And there's been strong evidence of yawning in those situations. So it clearly is linked to fatigue, it is linked to tiredness. The peculiar things are, and also in MS, which some people know about MS, some people won't. I don't want to patronise people that do, but obviously it's a demyelination of, so your white fatty tissues around the nerves are depleted or broken, and so the nerve transmission along the nerves happens irregularly or incompletely, and so you get spasmodic movement. In MS, people tend to get fatigued more, and therefore it gives rise to yawning. And if there's an excessive amount of yawning, then that's of concern, and it's worrying. We're beginning to see cortisol levels rise there. Do people yawn generally more when they're fatigued? Again, it's an individual thing, and it's a bit like when I mentioned some people going into an interview, they'll get anxious and they'll yawn, perhaps for a different reason. It may be that they're getting themselves to such a state, an anxious state, where they're feeling fatigued. Because people talk about getting mentally fatigued and physically fatigued. You can have two people go to a new job, or one person go to a new job, one person go to the same job but they've been there a long time. The person who's going to the job for the first time may come back doing exactly the same job but absolutely shattered, and they've had to concentrate, they've had to be sociable, they want to fit into the situation, and they're mentally drained, and yet it may be physically exactly the same. So I think it's to do with, it's an individual thing, to do with the way you perceive things as well. So long answer to your question, but I think,
following on from that,
Yeah.
and in line with what you were saying about evolutionary behaviours,
Yeah.
I read a study a couple of years ago, I can't remember where it came from or whether it was reputable or not, but there was something along the lines of a pack mentality. For example, with wolves, they'll yawn to signify, okay, it's time to sleep. So
Right.
that would imply that more social animals would communicate in that type of way. So
Yeah.
in the world of animal yawning, is it, you may not know this, I don't know if you studied it or not,
Yeah.
but is it more prevalent in more social animals and less prevalent in more solitary?
I don't know, and I haven't studied animals, and that would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Because then that would lend itself more to, well, it could be an evolutionary thing, but it could be more to do with a contagious yawning idea, where you're seeing someone else respond in that manner, so it is a good thing to do. You're, especially in a pack mentality or a pack situation, you're aligning yourself to that group, not because you want to be sociable with the other wolves, but because you want to survive. And maybe that is the basic evolutionary thing, that it's a survival thing.
And interestingly, I wonder, is yawning more prevalent in stronger members of social groups, so that ideas are communicated down the ranks with a simple facial gesture?
That's a great idea. I don't know whether it's been tested.
That could be your next PhD.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, you're getting too old. Maybe you could do it.
Teresa, I think you're next.
Yeah, if about contagious yawning, have there been any studies, because you said it was to do with sort of fitting in and sort of, like, because some people are more, you know, have more empathy towards other people, and is there any correlation, like sort of someone that, you know, like, because some people that if they see someone else crying, it makes them cry, and that, is there any sort of correlation between that? And also, if someone's got autism who doesn't have that empathy, do they still have that contagious yawning?
There are some reports about autism, and there is a difference in frequency of yawning in people with autism, which would fall in line with not being able to be on the same social level and not giving the same level of interaction, particularly eye contact, that sort of thing. And that would sort of seem to fit into our understanding of mental attribution theory, where the more empathic you are, then you're going to more and more align yourself.
But could that be that, because like with people with autism, they tend to avoid sort of facial, well, autism, I mean, but Asperger's is sort of with, you know, they still do sort of mix in social situations, but they tend to, you know, avoid facial, you know, looking in people's faces and that, so they might just miss those signals rather than...
That might be an explanation of why they don't, and why they may be perceived to be less empathic towards people, because people are picking up the wrong cues or picking up no cues, and that's the lack of understanding of that individual. But I think that still fits into the feeling of wanting to belong to a group and copying a behaviour, and certainly the studies I've read have been that if people are less clued into that, then they won't yawn in those situations. The trouble is, there's always a but with all these sorts of things, and you'll know individually that you'll think, well, I'm, you know, I appreciate when someone's showing an emotion, and you know, I could be that person, but I'm damn sure I won't yawn in that situation. And so there's always an individual sort of difference. But you've got to look at the status that person is. Is it that they're determined not to yawn, or is it that they are well rested and that despite wanting to be part of that group, they could be part of that group in other ways and copying other bits of the behaviour, but their level is just, you know, not susceptible enough to yawn. So is it a trigger? Is it a neurochemical trigger? Is it a cortisol level?
Is it just yawning is such an obvious thing that you notice it? Whereas if someone's copying something sort of subtle behaviour, you're not going to notice it so much, are you? If someone's yawning, you're going to notice.
Yeah. But it's, and that's why it's interesting, and everybody can relate to it, because it is one of these bits of behaviour that people say, well, I know what yawning is, you know, because I do it and I've seen it, and everybody can identify with it. But it's sometimes these obvious behaviours that are the most difficult to actually find a commonality and find a reason for, and that's why it's a conundrum. It's so difficult to actually find out what's going on, and even the mechanisms involved in it seem to be different, you know, across and within people.
I think there was this gentleman here at the back with the glasses.
Hello.
Hello.
A couple of questions. You were talking about you're not sure whether cortisol's cause or effect.
Yes.
Sneak up and jab someone.
Sorry, I missed that bit.
If you sneak up and jab someone with a syringe full of cortisol, are they less likely to yawn afterwards? Everything else, but for different reasons. I mean, if you artificially change the level of cortisol in someone, then you artificially change the amount of yawning. Equally, if you stick someone in an environment where there's more oxygen, will they yawn less? Or if the air is cooler, will they yawn less? It seems you could potentially knock out some of those hypotheses just by changing the conditions.
Theoretically, I would agree, yes, and it's a good question. I don't like the idea of sticking a syringe into somebody, especially unaware. I think I'd be struck off if we did that. But the idea behind it is probably quite a sensible one in terms of just finding out the reasons to these things. And a lot of these things are, oh, that's the solution. The trouble is setting up even something like that to make it experimental and to get rid of so many extraneous variables is actually more complicated. It is difficult. And even just setting up a study to make sure that people are arriving at the same time, you're taking the same amount from people, or rather you're getting the samples at exactly the same point when you think that they have yawned. And there's also the big controversy about, is yawning naturally in a situation different from an artificial yawning? And I don't mean people faking yawning or being told to yawn, but people yawning under an experimental condition. Is that different to a social type of yawning? But again, yes, I potentially we could.
With something like, okay, syringe and so on is difficult, but checking whether someone yawns for a cool condition should be straightforward.
In cool
Conditions.
Yes.
I mean, if there's a brain cooling effect, if that's what it's about, you would expect there to be less yawning when it's not cool. Norwegians will yawn less than Australians.
And it's quite funny because I'm actually doing a study with in Norway, so I'll let you know about it. And, there's a Norwegian psychologist who's quite intrigued and interested, and we're going to get together to try and put a study together about that. Certainly, it is damn cold over there. I went over there last year.
But I mean, if they yawn as much, then you
Yes.
Can I just very briefly ask as well? The other thing, we concentrate a lot on the amount of air you take in, but the most obvious thing about yawning is working your mouth. And there's the whole muscle thing. You get a muscular reaction throughout your chest and neck.
Yeah.
How is that related? Because you don't need to open your mouth wide to breathe deeply.
It's curious because because we've done videos of people yawning as well, and we've taken the EMG, the electrical activity of people yawning as well, and people yawn in different ways, and they open their mouths to different extents, and they don't necessarily open it very, very widely. Some people yawn so much that they dislocate the jaw, sometimes click as they do this. And other people, it's a small amount, but they have yawned. You might look at somebody and say, "Is that a yawn?" And it wasn't a yawn. For them, it was an important yawn. But, so yeah, there was a variance in that as well. So, and that would not knock on the head, but it may query, whether it really is about taking oxygen in, but maybe for that person that's a sufficient amount, in that instance.
But you don't do stomach breathing, do you? When you take, because I assume, when you take in air there, you take it into you do stomach breathing, so you fill in your lungs. But when you yawn, it tends to be quite shallow, and it is more about the facial muscles than actually what you're taking in.
There's a big variance. That some people will have a good old yawn, and it will be a big movement. It will be a big.
Yeah.
And other people will yawn to a smaller extent, and also maybe more politely in certain situations. So again, the intercostal muscles are involved, but to different degrees for different people.
Right, we've got lots of questions. I think Emma at the back was first.
I've got a couple of questions as well, sorry. Obviously, a lot of the time when you want to yawn in situations where you don't really want to be seen to be yawning, and if there are these kind of neurochemical implications, is there any negative effects that might come from trying to suppress?
Well, that's a really good theory, because and this is where we're not sure about cortisol. It's implicated. We're pretty sure it's implicated, but cause and effect. We don't know. Does it naturally rise? Does it cause yawning, or is it an artifact of yawning? So therefore, going on from that, is it detrimental if we do stifle yawns? Do we suppress this cortisol? We know cortisol is involved in stress, and obviously you produce more cortisol. But again, it's part of the feedback situation, so it's triggering other hormones to be produced, other good hormones, if you like. So it's all, it's a complicated picture. It's not just one thing happening. It's part of a system. So that would be quite interesting.
So just on the same point. So do people have a base level of cortisol? If so, would it be easy enough to measure yourself daily and take readings once you've yawned and to actually establish whether it's more effect?
Well, again, theoretically we can set something up like that, and that's what we would like to do. We'd like bigger studies and studies looking at people in different situations and during the day, because everybody has different body rhythms, and that's an important bit of work that we need to do. The things that are holding us back at the moment is finding analyses of the cortisol tests. They're very expensive at the moment. We can get this down cheaper, and it's funding this sort of research. We need to do very focused, short, small-scale bits of work that we know may have a degree of success to prove to funding bodies that this could potentially be useful. But study, as you say, things like that are incredibly useful in terms of data, but they're expensive to set up.
Sorry, Emma, continue, and then we'll go here and then here.
I was just going to ask, kind of following on from the point that gentleman made, obviously some animals like lions and hippos is quite a threatening, kind of opening their mouth wide or closing their teeth. So has anyone ever looked at whether it's kind of an evolutionary, like, defensive mechanism while they're working on figuring out the next move?
I mean,
whether there's just like an intimidation thing.
I mean, I'm sure they have. I'm sure the animal work probably has, addressed some of those issues, the social issues, and why animals may yawn in certain situations, and maybe to keep the hierarchy in place. Whether it has other mechanisms involved, and we know about a lot of monkeys showing teeth, and obviously showing teeth in yawning. Can be quite an aggressive thing. It's not a smile. It's a way of actually showing somebody not to come nearer. In certain situations. So it may well have been looked at, but I still haven't come across anything to really give us a better understanding of how that helps us understand, when it happens in humans. But opening the mouth, a lion yawning is a big threatening thing, and if you don't know that they're just yawning, certainly for us it would be best to stay away really, rather than ask too many questions of them.
Following on from what the chap was saying, it seems to me, if I remember when the last yawn, not somewhere, there's a sort of stretching thing. Is it not similar to when you stretch your muscles? And to me, when I yawn, I don't think about needing air. I mean, I can go for a run and I can breathe quite fine without yawning. But it's the muscles for me, my face and jaw, that really get something happens. That's, I don't know, that's my experience of yawning. It's a stretching kind of something I've heard. So have you made any sort of observations about similarities between stretching and yawning?
Well, we found that there's a big increase in electrical activity when you yawn, because you are stretching those muscles, even if it's a small yawn, and even for some people it's a big yawn, but it's small compared to other people. So we know that there's a big increase in activity. We know that for some people there is a link between stretching the muscles in the face and stretching the muscles down here around the lungs. We know that happens. But as the point was made earlier, surely you open your mouth, you get a lot of air in, or you're being a big stretch or a small stretch. It's because of this variability that it doesn't give us the commonality. That, like you say, for yourself, you may not involve all the muscles, and it may be a smaller yawn, and you may not yawn so much. For other people, it's a different situation, whereas they do. And also, we don't know about cultures either. Cultures, like Western culture versus Middle Eastern culture or something else. Is it a polite thing versus is it suppressed for different reasons? It's like burping and farting, really, isn't it? Not very nice topic, I know, it's a restaurant, but some people say, oh, you've had good food, and that's a pleasant thing to do, to burp afterwards, to acknowledge that that's enjoyed it. So I think there's variability.
Is there a sort of scientific definition of it? Because it's all to do with inhaling and exhaling air. Is there a percentage of air that needs to be inhaled and exhaled to form a yawn?
Yeah, a great question, and it would be good to quantify that, scientifically quantify that. And there is equipment, there are tools around to do that, to look at tidal flow and stuff of the amount of oxygen coming in and going out of the body, particularly the lungs. You could do that in the right physiological laboratory. Again, it's setting that up, and again, looking as a researcher, clinical researcher, as the bigger picture. You've got to start off small, and you've got to look at something very focused. to try and get some attraction in terms of funding. You know, certain areas get funding very easily because they're sexy or they're top level. In this area, for some people, excites, obviously me and neuroscientists and neurologists, but for some people, it's less important. When you tie it within other neurological diseases like MS, which is incredibly important, you can make sense of it, and people start to listen to you a little bit more, and there is a big link there. But again, it's still difficult to get funding for any of these things. But yeah, all these points are really good to have a bigger study which involved many measurements. But the more measurements you do, the more problems you can have arising for yourself. In terms of you start to measure something else, but the mere measuring of that can cause an effect for the person. If you're wearing a piece of equipment, immediately that's starting to have an effect on somebody. So it needs to be thought of quite carefully. But yeah, it would be a good thing to do.
Going back to the social animal contagious yawn, would it help to look at animals that yawn but don't contagiously yawn? Like I know there was an Ig Nobel Prize a bit ago for the tortoises, like they yawn and they trained the tortoise to yawn on command, but they don't contagiously yawn, so they made it yawn at other tortoises and they didn't make other tortoises yawn. So is there something like, it could just be like an evolutionary baggage from previously the tortoise was doing something. It may have been socially linked, but now it isn't anymore, it's just kind of crossed off from its hereditary past. And so in other species could it be that it's still there because of something that was previously helpful, but isn't so much anymore? Yeah,
a bit like our appendix.
Yeah, exactly.
I would like to know where they got the funding from that piece of research.
Straight down, much to be fair, just stop watching a tortoise.
Again, it's something I can't answer because it's out of my expertise, but interesting.
To solve your funding problem, a quick look at Google tells me that cortisol is involved in fat metabolism. So you need to write a book called Yawn Yourself Thin.
That's a great idea. Very topical, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
You've already mentioned that funding is very hard to get, and I think there's a real problem in the scientific community of scientists studying what is widely regarded to be banal, boring, and useless things. And I think that yawning could probably be regarded like that by a lot of the public, and by the public I mean people that don't have a massive interest in science or not scientists.
Yeah.
So can you just iterate what you thought what the value in this study is, and it was something to do with cortisol, I believe, and using the different levels to try and predict a deficiency or future potential for diseases?
If we can make sense of what happens in different situations, particularly in different neurological diseases or different neurological conditions, there is a possibility that it may also give us an indication of an untoward symptom that is occurring early on. And that would be great because it would help us in our diagnosis of some diseases that benefit from an early diagnosis. It may not give a cure, but it may make the lives of people better because we've managed to get the drugs into them earlier on, or the rehabilitation or whatever it is, so that their quality of life is prolonged or enhanced. That's the idea behind it.
How much credence do you put into that personally, and think this is actually something, because it's always good to rule stuff out, even that doesn't have to be the value in doing certain things. So how much credence do you put in actually that in your hypothesis? How strongly do you think it's true?
I think it's completely true, and I suppose it actually comes down, we're talking about some people being empathic and some people not. I mean, my background is from clinical psychology, and I trained as a neuropsychologist. So I've come from a background of working in the NHS and privately for a number of years, where I joined the profession to want to help people, to actually want to make a difference to people, to want people to be empowered to help themselves, and to get people better in some instances, or at least to improve lives. So I mean, where I'm coming from is the same situation now. I'm still involved in a certain amount of assessment, less so in treatment, and much more in research and teaching, and that's just through my own choice of career. But I still have the same values there, and that I truly believe that there is something in this hypothesis, and that the reason for the Holy Grail, wanting to actually find whether this is the case, is with the potential that it could be a new diagnostic tool. And I'm not in it to try and make millions, and I'm not trying, if it makes a lot of difference to a lot of people, then that's fantastic, and I think that's people are in things for different reasons, and that's the reason I'm in for it. And I do believe it's strongly, it's not just something. I didn't need to go into the area, it wasn't like, oh, this is a good bandwagon, because it isn't. It's actually a bad bandwagon to go in, because I can't get any funding, it's really hard to get funding. But I think there is something there, I really do.
But that's different have financial implications as well, can't it? Because if you can get early diagnosis, that is going to save money in the long run as well. So if you want to go on that, that's the way you sell it, isn't it?
And you're absolutely right, because I think funding councils, the ones that I've applied to, increasingly want to know the financial benefit of this.
And the benefits of the public.
Yeah, some are sort of entwined. The less money we have to spend on getting people better, the less we can waste on other things. But there's always a financial question in that manner.
When you look at yours, just on the actual experimental side, do you look at someone and say, well, you've yawned, or do you ask them if they've?
We do both. Initially, we do a visual observation of somebody, so we try and establish what a yawn is to them. But we do questionnaires, and we also verbally ask them whether or not that is a yawn when they're yawning, and once there's a difficulty here that you don't want to preempt something, and you don't want to you want to encourage a yawn, but you want to know that you've accurately pictured it, and that's why we do a video of the person as well as the EMG. Does that answer? Yeah.
Is it sort of a, have you ever had a proper yawn, or is it? I mean, is there anything sort of independently verifiable which defines what a yawn is?
Well, only in terms of the EMG, that there's in those people who have yawned or said that they've yawned in that situation seem to have a bigger EMG envelope. In other words, from rest to the highest point of the picture. It's a bit like if you look at a measurement of noise, it looks like a peaks of noise, that it's higher in those situations than people who have just merely opened their mouth and closed it. So we'll do movements, measurements of movements of opening and closing mouths to know what that is, so that if they've done that and they've said, oh, I've yawned, and if it's the same level, then we would know whether or not there's a difference, and that hasn't occurred.
And if you do a voluntary yawn, I mean, don't fake it into the stage, but
yeah.
if you try and do what you would consider to be a yawn, the whole thing, does that have the same sort of effect in terms of what you observe as someone who has a genuine?
That is something that we don't know, and that's, I think I alluded to that earlier on, that what is really difficult to control against is that a social contextual yawn versus an artificial yawn, and indeed things like a drug-induced yawn, where they've done it mainly in animal models, is there qualitatively a difference? Is it do you have a higher level of cortisol because the yawn has been forced versus somebody doing it naturally? There's not enough data. We don't know, and there is a certain amount of patient involvement in that, or participant involvement, to know whether or not that is a proper yawn versus a fake yawn. But we can only go so far, and hopefully, after testing a few hundred people, you'll know whether or not something is coming out that they can't all be fakers. Hopefully,
I think Emma at the back, then Sharon, and then here.
I was just going to ask, sorry, Megan. This is something obviously that people have been looking into for hundreds of years, and it's so common across kind of humans and animals and everyone. Do you think there ever will be that one definitive explanation for why we yawn, or do you think there'll always be lots of different kind of branches?
Well, all we ever can do in anything really, medicine and science, is to go down certain avenues, but with an open mind to consider other theories and other work that comes along. And all these questions are really good because it's good feedback for myself to query what we're doing. You have to have some hunch, as it were. There's some scientific method for doing things, and we do it, by hypothesis testing. So, at the moment we're trying to test against this hypothesis, but there may be other explanations along the way. We may be barking at the wrong tree. Hopefully not, but this is one avenue that we're doing that we know we can get some good results from eventually. Good results as in we can exclude it, or we can say we're on the right track, we need to do something else, like some of the suggestions that have come up now. Any researcher is passionate about something, and I think the danger is believing in it to the degree where you're blinkered, and then you think, well, this has got to be the case, and you don't listen to anybody else, and then you come up with a result that someone else says, well, you didn't listen, and it's wrong. Hopefully I haven't done that, not yet anyway.
Just a question, or sort of a comment really, and it kind of links us back to those of you that might have been in the very first one of our Cafe Scientifique meetings. Has anybody actually looked at other physiological measurements as well as the EMG of things like heart rate and heart rate variability during what people are saying are yawns, and whether or not those are changing, and blood pressure and all those sorts of things simultaneously?
I'm not aware that they have, but that's not to say that they haven't.
Yeah.
And if there is work out there that has been done, then I'd love to know about it, because that would inform us more. I'm aware that people have looked into yawning, and people have looked at different measurements of yawning and stuff. But as I say, to measure so many parameters at the same time sometimes is counter beneficial, because you're having to wear equipment or you're monitoring things, and sometimes you can suppress other things that you want to measure. But I think those are all good measurements, to do. In the same way, we need to exclude, and we do exclude for our study, lots of disorders that people can't participate in this first phase of the study. If they have a set of these disorders, there's a big list, because obviously that's going to perhaps give rise to a yawn versus someone who hasn't got a disorder like that.
But perhaps we can have a chat later, because I know of a couple of people that have got expertise along those lines that it might be worthwhile you chatting to.
Wonderful, yeah, well thank you, yeah, welcome.
Yeah, sometimes in genetics you get a particular trait that piggybacks on the back of other traits, and pick up feathers, piggyback on something else that's more important.
Yes.
And I wonder, in terms of trying to disentangle this idea of social yawning from physiological yawning, what you feel about the fact that social yawning may be just co-opted physiological yawning. So physiological yawning came first, and then somehow in social groups it's co-opted for some other reason, and that perhaps the causative effect is not sociological, but was always physiological, and that the social stuff came later, presumably.
Absolutely. The same comment really is similar about evolution and about the animal kingdom. Our animals yawning in situations other than for social belonging. Does it give another signal? Does it have another reason? Has it been adapted over time? Is it redundant now? Lots of really good questions. Don't know. But yeah.
One there and then one come here. Yeah.
Sorry, just sort of forming my own theories about it.
That's right, we all do.
Bear in mind it's sort of spread across lots of the animal kingdom. We all evolved over sort of similar kind of periods of time. We all started off evolving in a slightly more oxygen-rich environment. And sort of tying that in with the fact that you're sort of stretching, like when you tense your muscles, you're increasing blood flow, getting more oxygen around the body, and sort of maybe helping out with some funding. Do you think that the environmental changes, increase of carbon dioxide in the air and all this kind of stuff, maybe increasing people's yawning, and it's as a result, maybe the fact that you're not getting enough oxygen?
I mean, yeah, it could. Well, that's possible, especially if it is to do with receiving oxygen, and that's important for wakefulness, and lack of that is making us more fatigued, more tired, less able to concentrate and be alert, and therefore it's suppressing. Whether, that's why I say culturally, or even environmentally, in terms of town versus rural situations, or big congested towns, whether there's a difference. The difficulty is also you can tie it into stress levels. I can think of my brother visits Tokyo every year to teach martial arts, and in Tokyo it's heavily polluted, and people walk around with masks and things, and protect themselves and don't go out unless they they don't go to the main centres unless they have to. But is there a difference in the level of yawning there? But there's a whole different social culture in Japan. There's a whole different way of conducting business, from getting up in the morning to go to bed at night, and the whole the way of living is different. So to compare the environment, you have to take into consideration how people interact with that environment as well. So whilst it's probably worthwhile doing, it just adds to the complication. And that's why I think many of us take things into an experimental situation first of all, because to contextualise it sometimes it's too difficult, because there's too many variables. But who knows? Yeah, we're all polluting the planet one way or another. Some more than others. I'm not talking about people in the room, but maybe. And yeah, that could all contribute to it. Maybe we're all making ourselves less intelligent and more, tired. I don't know. Not so many people yawning here at the moment. So.
I've got two sort of quite separate points actually. One was, it seemed like the problem is there's the natural yawning that you do on your own when you need to yawn, and then this whole copycat yawning, and there's no answer that sort of brings those two things together because they seem quite different in origin. But if you're the leader of the pack and you yawn because you know you've got to be wakeful because you've got to go and hunt prey, then you want your pack to also be wakeful too. So the copycat yawning could just be that the leaders of the pack have said, we need to be wakeful, you guys need to yawn and get more oxygen in as well, because I want you to be wakeful also, so we can all go off and hunt the prey together.
Sure.
So that perhaps could tie in the kind of the physiological need to yawn and also the communicative sort of function, potentially.
Yeah, and I think, although I've been slightly scathing of sort of animal studies, and I don't mean to be totally, it's a bit sort of flippant, I think some things that can be learned from animal studies is that, if it is evolutionary, then taking that idea, then, maybe is it something that is redundant or misplaced now, in terms of humans. So that's a value of obviously studying animals and animal models, and maybe there are other reasons for why that happens and why there is a difference in the animal kingdom. Whether it's the same in humans, I don't know, and as I say, we don't know whether there is a difference even neurochemically of a contagious yawn versus a yawn, as you say, that you do, in your own private situation. But it would be good to, neurochemically we can measure these, and by doing that, this is hopefully, my idea of making some sense of what is happening in these different situations by taking, in this case, targeting cortisol, thinking that may be a biomarker. We don't know.
That was my other point, completely separate. The cortisol analysis, when you said about people who are depressed or chronic fatigue, did you say that they yawn more often than normal?
People who tend to have major depression, their brain temperature tends to rise, and if we think, as we do with people with multiple sclerosis, that their brain temperature can rise and that it goes down, it lowers when they do excessively yawn. Is it the same in depression? I don't know.
I know that I've read quite a few things recently, can't remember details or author or anything, but about chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic depression, all of those things actually having lower cortisol levels as opposed to raised, whereas we always think cortisol is a stress chemical, and if you've got a stress-related disease, you'll have high cortisol.
Yes.
But it seems like I've read quite good proof that actually it's the opposite. So I wasn't quite sure that if depressed people are yawning, but actually they've got chronic long-term depression, actually their cortisol's lower, so that kind of doesn't fit with the cortisol.
Yeah, and going back to the point that are we looking at just this and blinking ourselves to looking at a bigger picture, that is it part of the feedback, as so many things in the body are tied in with other things. It isn't just one chemical that's doing this. So is it a more complicated picture? Well, yes, it may be, but at the moment the best we can do is to look at people who haven't got chronic fatigue, haven't got these disorders and syndromes, to try and look at the purest situation of a yawn and the cortisol situation to see what's happening there. And so far it looks that there is an elevated cortisol level when somebody yawns, when they haven't got any of these other conditions. We need to find out whether it's cause and effect, whether there are other neurotransmitters, hormones involved in it, and whether there is a difference in these other diseases. And that's where we are. We're at a very early stage really of making sense of it. But at least we're a little bit further on than before. I mean, nobody looked at cortisol in this respect before. So we're hopeful that it will give us some answers that we just didn't have before. But yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Sorry, me again. Cortisol is also an immunosuppressant. Again, Google. But it strikes me that the whole social yawning thing could be a learned response if it reduces the effect of allergies. Then if someone in some way detects that they're suffering from that, they yawn, they will produce cortisol and fix that one around. And other people near them perhaps will, at some level, understand that there are pollutants in the air which yawning will reduce the effect of.
Well, it could be, and the point was well raised before as well, which sort of supports that idea that to suppress a yawn, are we actually doing damage to our body? Are we actually suppressing a chemical that is important to rise in that situation?
People with hay fever, for example, yawn more or less. I mean, it'd be an interesting thing to find out. If you yawn less, it might mean that you're not as good at suppressing your immune response.
We know histamine is obviously implicated with hay fever and a lot of allergies, and that just adds to the complication, doesn't it? We've got yet another chemical involved. I don't know. I'm not. Hay fever is another. I mean, we could go on and on, but I think just write that first book and then that book or whatever it was.
I've got allergic rhinitis, which means I have like hay fever symptoms all year round, and I wouldn't say yawn anymore. But what I do is when I get tired, I tend to cry, which I know is some people do it. It's not a very common thing, but it's not totally uncommon that everybody does it.
It isn't totally uncommon, and I think people have those reactions for different. I mean, if it's a mood-related thing, then
it's not a mood.
If it is.
No, it's not at all. I can't help it. Say cry, my eyes water. When I get really tired, my eyes start watering. And I've got a few friends who do it, and a lot of people go, "Oh, that's a bit odd." And they go, "What's wrong with you?" You sit there crying. It's like, I'm just tired.
And like many of these things, we're quite quick to, because of our culture, we're quite quick to say something is normal and abnormal. And some people have higher levels of chemicals in their body than other people, and they function very well. And it really is, that's why it's important to take baselines and to understand what's happening in the individual as much as it is in the community. And like you said, that's something that is, an artifact in you, but is, you've seen it in other people. And the percentage of people, well, it doesn't matter if most, in the end, it's what affects you and what is of difficulty in your life. Is it a difficult problem or not? And we've got to, we have to accept that there are so many individualities in everything we look at, and that's what makes it just incredibly difficult to study.
Very interesting.
It is, that is interesting, yeah. I'm not doing another study.
So we've got another question in the back here from Emma. Are there any other last questions which I'm burning through? Because I'm conscious I was
No,
wanting
I'm
for a
finished.
very long time. Right. Okay, so we've got one from Emma and then...
We're not inviting him again. Only joke.
I was just going to make a suggestion really, following on from what you said. Is there any kind of idea that maybe the copycat yawning is because they're all kind of exposed to the same environmental factors? So if there's less oxygen, then surely everyone's going to have the same sort of need to inhale more. Has that ever been explored?
Well, you might come to that conclusion, and that's who's to say that that's right or wrong? And that's the interplay between something physiological happening and something socially happening. How much, or where is the balance in that? And that's something we, don't know. It's unanswered.
But then how would, when you see a picture of someone yawning, that can make you want to yawn as well. So that would totally, because that's obviously, there's no other factors, is it? It's just that stimulus, visual stimulus, isn't it, that's making you want to yawn. Or even, I find even people talking about yawning makes me want to yawn.
But this is it. This is why there's a susceptibility for some people, but not everybody. And that's what I'm saying. Is it similar, or is it just just interestingly similar? With hypnosis, some people are susceptible to autosuggestion. They can make themselves do things, or they can be affected by someone else telling them or suggesting something to do, in terms of behaviour. And other people are just, it has no effect. So it's a threshold level. Again, variability, isn't it?
I was saying before that your talk tends to be one of the only ones where you can tell who's paying attention because they're hiding their yawns. Is there anything, like everyone always thinks, he's yawning, he's bored. Is there anything in that? Is that actually a thing, or is that just stuff that we think? Because I've never yawned when I'm bored. I don't know anyone who really has, but that's a thing that everyone associates with. Is that just a social tale?
Well, I always make a play on that in my lectures, because obviously people know about what I'm studying now, and obviously people cannot help yawning in certain situations. But I mainly teach postgraduate students at the moment, and they're a variable bunch, come from different backgrounds, and what they've done the night before varies, and so their concentration is different. So. But the fact that one person will yawn and another person doesn't, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily paying less attention. It just means that their cortisol level is different.
Okay, well I think that could be an appropriate moment to pause on, because I'm sure this discussion will continue on, and certainly I think just from the debate that's being generated this evening, we've come up with about 20 different research proposals. Several headaches for ethics committees as well. And a best-selling book, which will obviously fund all those research proposals. Which just really leads me to kind of some thanks, really. Obviously, enormous thanks to the guys here who are all kind of squirreling around, who, as ever, have looked after us in a superb way. And I do hope that you will all come and frequent Boscanova, who was so generous in terms of hosting this. I want to say an enormous thank you to Sharon and Emily from AECC. You may be aware, Cafe Scientifique is very much a co-collaboration between AECC, Bournemouth University, and Becca. I work in the Research and Knowledge Exchange Office alongside our fabulous, now embarrassed looking event coordinator, Mary, who I know many of you already know. Also, just want to give you a heads up, please do pick up a leaflet from this table. We will kind of continue to publicise our next event on Tuesday the 5th of March. Dr. Sarah Bates, actually Simon's colleague in the same school, is doing really fascinating work in terms of face blindness and kind of recognition. Get some more details there. We'll be posting that all out, but please do along, it would be a fascinating talk. Which really just leaves me to thank Simon, who I think, I'm sure you'll all agree, has been really, really fascinating this evening, both in terms of his introductory talk, but also a really great discussion afterwards. So just an enormous round of applause, say thank you to Simon. I should say as well, thank you all so much for coming along this evening. It's been great to see you all.
Thank you.